Welcome to our video on modern financial management for not-for-profits. My name's Rebecca Gatehouse and I'm one of the business development managers and not-for-profit solution advisors at Professional Advantage. So now we're going to move on to part 2 of our video, and that is around the financial structure and how we manage grants. So the core structure of Business Central, how the chart of accounts works, is really important when you're looking at a system that's going to suit the complexity, and suit your future growth as well. So Rob's going to cover off on that. And importantly, we need to manage our grants. We need to be able to track the expenses and revenue against our grants, our programs, our services as well. So we're going to highlight that briefly as well. Thank you, Rob.
Okay. Once again, I'm going to share my screen. Let's go back into Business Central. So here I am in my Cronus Community Services company. And if I just go into my chart of accounts, which I've got a shortcut at the top here, here's a typical chart of accounts. Now, this is just a sample chart of accounts, of course, that I'm currently using. You'll notice that when I scroll through the chart of accounts here, it's actually grouped. A lot of the chart of accounts, we've got these groupings where, and it's all optional. You don't have to create these groupings, but everyone has their own way of structuring their chart of accounts. So I've got some accounts that are all grouped. The purpose of the grouping is it allows you to summarize multiple accounts at different levels. And you can obviously, by doing that, it gives you the ability to inquire on those accounts at different levels and report on those accounts at different levels. Rather than having to build reports that summarize accounts, you can do that in your chart of accounts even before the case. So that's a little bit about the chart of accounts themselves. And you'll see that in my example data here, my chart of accounts is just utilizing a 4-character numeric code. But that can actually go up to 20. I think the limit is 20 characters and it's alphanumeric. So you can have a very, very large account code. Once you've established your chart of accounts, I just come down here into my P&L section of the chart of accounts and let it catch up. Okay, so we get down to this section of my P&L here, a whole bunch of accounts here, operating expenses and so forth. How do I then, the question then comes about is, how do I then analyze my chart of accounts by potential ways of breaking it up? Would be things like, I want to report by territory. I might want to report by department. I might want to report by, and most importantly, by grant or funding source or whatever it may be that I need to report by. Well, the way we do that in Business Central is we use these things called dimensions. So every time we transact in Business Central, a transaction can have assigned to it one or many or none dimensions. And these are all the dimensions that I have in my sample data here at the moment. And you'll see that, for example, I have a department dimension. And behind that department dimension, I have a whole bunch of department codes, yeah? And you'll see that I also have a business group dimension. And under the business group dimension, again, I have different business groups, being disability and family in my example, in my community services company. And then when I come down to the grant code, again, I have all my new grant codes. So every time we have a grant, that's an interesting way of spelling Commonwealth. Every time we have a grant, we come in here and we just simply add the new grant code in here, and away we go. We now have the ability to capture revenue, expenses, income, whatever it may be, against that particular new grant code, yeah? So what does that look like when we're transacting? Well, I'm going to show you by going into a general journal itself. So I'm going to come into the journal screen, and you'll see here I've got a journal which I've started. Here's one I've prepared earlier. So I'm entering a journal with some journal dates, document number. I'm journaling using my 8640, which is my miscellaneous expense account. And you can see here when I'm transacting, I'm capturing my business group. In this case here, I've got these journal lines allocated to my disability business group. I've captured my grant code, and then obviously my amount. Now, in my example here, I'm just showing these 2 dimension codes here, but you can show as many dimension codes as you want. In fact, you can show up to 8 different dimension codes here, but you can capture unlimited amounts of dimension codes. So it's very nice, very easy to view the different dimensions and how you're transacting and how you're capturing that information, whether that be via expenses or balance sheet and so forth. Now, one of the important things to note is that when I'm doing this, behind the scenes, I may have invoked different rules to enforce some of this functionality. So, for example, when I established this account here, 8640, I may have told the system that that is a mandatory, or should I say the business group is a mandatory dimension on that. And the way we do that, I'm just come back out of here, back into the chart of accounts. And if I just go searching for my miscellaneous expense account in here, you'll see that when I establish this account in my chart of accounts, one of the rules I put in place in the dimensions area is here I will tell it which dimensions are actually mandatory or non-mandatory or optional and so forth, or even blocked perhaps. Against each GL account, I can establish which dimensions I want to make mandatory or optional by literally setting up the dimension code in here and then nominating whether the value posting is mandatory, same code, i.e. fixed code every time, or no code, in other words, block that code. And that's how I can establish the rules around how things are captured, how dimensions are captured against different accounts. And what's really nice about this is that different GL accounts can have different dimensions mandatory. So you may invoke the business group and the grant is mandatory on this GL account, but then on a different GL account, you have a totally different set of dimensions that are mandatory depending on the expense and the account, the nature of the expense that that account is capturing. So one of the classics is we see happen all the time, and that is people will establish dimensions to capture individual employee expenses and record that employee expense against an individual employee to facilitate with things like FBT reporting at the end of the year. So in which case, any expense codes that are capturing FBT style expenses will also prompt for an employee dimension. Okay, so that's a little bit about the chart of accounts and the dimension structure, which obviously is quite key in capturing all those expenses. So then when it comes time to inquiring against any of those dimensions, well, that becomes a pretty straightforward process, because then here in the chart of accounts itself, I can basically say, hey, I want to do a quick query. I want to do a query by dimension. And in this case here, I've selected my grant dimension is one of the ones I want to sort of query on. And then when I say show matrix here, you'll see that basically will return my whatever accounts I'm filtering on. In this case here, I've just filtered this inquiry by my P&L accounts. And you can see here there's my P&L accounts, there's my income accounts. And each column is representative of each of the grant codes that I've got. Now, again, you can flip this. You can flip it the other way around if you so wish. It's totally up to you how you structure these queries. But you can see here how easy it is to set up the queries and then to interrogate those queries by simply drilling down into the amounts, going right back to the source documents, etc., etc. So there's a little bit of insight as to how Business Central lends itself to capturing all the pertinent financial information to drive all of that grant reporting that you need to do on a regular basis. All right, Rebecca, back over to you.
Thanks, Rob. So in that little session there, we just had a quick look at how the financial structure is set up in Business Central. It has the flexibility to deal with all the different, iterations of our not-for-profit clients, depending on their nature, the services they offer, what type of funding they have. We can fit their requirements just within the standard out-of-the-box capability of Business Central. So hopefully we showed you and gave you a good feel for the overview and how we would manage that.